Hey, it's Surfing Victorian Surf Report, Friday the 31st of July, 2026, Midday Edition. G'day everyone and welcome back to Hey, it's Surfing. It's midday this Friday, and after several days of oversized swell, strong wind and fairly chaotic winter conditions, the Victorian coastline has finally settled into something far more approachable. The morning session is now behind us, but today certainly isn't finished. Winds remain light across much of the central Victoria. Seas are sitting below 1 metre, and the remaining southwest swell continues to provide worthwhile waves around the state. The surf coast has the cleanest and most organised conditions this afternoon. Mornington and Phillip Island are carrying a little more open beach size, while East Gippsland should continue improving as the wind and sea state gradually ease. Let's take a look at what's happening around the Victorian coastline from lunchtime onward. Statewide setup across Victoria's central coast. Winds are west to southwesterly at around 10 knots. Seas remain below 1 metre. The southwest swell is sitting between 1 and 1.5 metres across central waters, increasing to between 1.5 and 2.5 metres through the west. Those are offshore marine figures rather than breaking wave heights at the beach. The waves at individual breaks will depend on local exposure, swell direction, period, reef shape, and how effectively each location receives the remaining southwest energy. The broad picture for this afternoon is fairly simple. The surf coast offers the best overall quality. Mornington and Phillip Island carry a little more size, although both regions have some surface texture from the west to southwesterly breeze. East Gippsland remains more exposed to the southerly swell, but should become cleaner later today as the wind continues easing. As usual, starting on the surf coast today with the report, and this remains the most dependable region for the rest of the day. The large swell from earlier in the week has eased considerably, but there is still enough energy wrapping into established reefs. Torquay Point and the more protected inside breaks should generally sit around 1 to 2 feet. Bells Beach and Winky Pop are closer to 2 to 3 feet, with occasional larger waves arriving on the better pulses. Jan Juck and the more exposed reefs west of Bells may produce 3 to 4 foot surf, with a little more size continuing through the far western swell magnets. Those are estimated breaking wave heights based on the offshore swell range and the relative exposure of each break. The wind remains west to southwest at around 10 knots. That direction is reasonably favourable around the protected Torquay reefs, although Jan Juck and the more exposed coastline will carry some cross-shore texture. We are now close to the top of the tide. At Point Lonsdale, high tide arrives at approximately 1:38 this afternoon. Around Lorne, high tide is at roughly 1:14. That means the most protected reefs may feel slightly full and soft around lunchtime. As the tide begins falling through the afternoon, Bells, Winky Pop and some of the shallower reef sections should become more defined. The main trade-off is that more rock will gradually become exposed around the entries and exits. The best remaining surf coast window is from early afternoon through the middle of the day's falling tide. There is no major wind deterioration expected, so conditions should remain reasonably clean and organised. The main hazards are slippery, reef entries, exposed rock later this afternoon, residual sweep through the channels, and occasional larger sets arriving between quieter spells. The surf coast rates around 7.5 out of 10 this afternoon. It isn't a large day, but it should remain clean. enjoyable and highly surfable. Now moving across the Mornington Peninsula, and the exposed back beaches are carrying more size than the protected Torquay reefs. Gunnamatta, St Andrews and Rye Back Beach should generally sit around 3 to 4 feet, with occasional 5-foot sets at the better exposed banks. Portsea Back Beach may also reach 4 to 5 feet, where the remaining southwest swell finds a favourable sandbank. Those figures are estimates rather than uniform conditions across every section of the beach. One bank may be producing clean, workable walls while others stretch near, while another stretch nearby could be closing out or carrying a strong sweep. One bank may be producing clean, workable walls, while another stretch nearby could be closing out or carrying a strong sweep. The west to southwesterly wind isn't ideal for the open peninsula beaches, so expect some surface bump and lateral movement, particularly around Gunnamatta and the more exposed western sections. However, the wind is light enough for conditions to remain workable rather than completely spoiled. The tide is close to high around lunchtime and begins falling through the afternoon. That gradual drop should help define the sandbanks and sharpen some of the peaks that may have looked soft or full earlier today. The lower water may also strengthen the rips through the deeper gutters and make some sections increasingly shallow. The best remaining window should run from around 1 o'clock through the middle of the afternoon. Flinders and the western port side will be smaller, but those locations should offer calmer water and greater protection from the wind. The main hazards remain active. The main hazards remain active. Fair income. The remaining hazards are active rips, deep gutters, moving banks, and deceptively clean-looking conditions hiding the amount of water travelling along the beach. The Mornington Peninsula rates around 6.5 out of 10 this afternoon. The right bank could be enjoyable, but the region is less consistent and less refined than the surf coast. Phillip Island is holding a useful amount of southwest swell. Yay, go Phillip Island. Now let's check in on Phillip Island. Phillip Island is holding a useful amount of southwest swell. Cape Woolamai should generally sit around 3 to 4 feet, with occasional larger waves at the better exposed peaks. Forest Caves should offer similar size where the banks are working. Smith's Beach and Surfy's Point could be closer to 1 to 3 feet, while YCW and the most protected sections will be smaller again. Kilcunda and the exposed Bass Coast should carry 3 to 5 foot surf, although those locations will have stronger currents and fewer places to avoid the cross-shore breeze. The west to southwesterly airflow is not perfectly offshore at Woolamai, but it remains light enough to leave workable faces. There will be some surface texture and lingering lateral sweep through the deeper gutters. Western Port is continuing to rise toward a substantial high tide of approximately 2.87 metres at Stony Point shortly after 2:20 this afternoon. That means tidal flow is still increasing through the entrances, channels and reef passages around Phillip Island. The fuller tide may improve some of the protected beaches, but it can also complicate the currents near the island's major entrances. The best remaining opportunity is from now through to around 3 o'clock this afternoon. Woolamai should retain enough swell and the wind should remain light enough to keep the surf workable. The primary hazards are deep gutters, strong tidal movement, lateral sweep and isolated larger sets arriving outside the regular peaks. Phillip Island and the Bass Coast rate around 7 out of 10 this afternoon. There is slightly more size than Torquay, but also more current and less favourable wind angle. Let's move on to East Gippsland. Further east, Gippsland is continuing to settle through the afternoon. Southwesterly winds are expected to ease as the day progresses, while the sea state drops toward 1 metre and eventually below 1 metre this evening. The main swell remains southerly at around 1.5 to 2 metres. Around Lake's entrance, surf could generally sit in the 2 to 3 foot range, whereas 90 Mile Beach may produce 2 to 4 foot peaks depending on the local banks and exposure. Cape Conran, Marlow and the more southerly exposed beaches around Malakuta could see 3 to 5 foot surf with occasional larger waves in the far east. Those estimates are based on the official southerly swell forecast and the different levels of coastline exposure across the region. Lake's entrance is often smaller than the broader marine forecast suggests, while Cape Conran and the far eastern coast receive much more of the direct southerly energy. The tide at Lake's entrance is now falling toward a low at approximately 2:44 this afternoon. That falling tide may sharpen the beach peaks, but will also increase flow around the entrance and expose shallower banks. The best East Gippsland window should arrive later this afternoon as the wind and sea state continue easing. The main hazards are strong bar and entrance currents, uneven short period energy, shallow banks around low tide, and greater wave power toward Cape Conran and Malakuta. East Gippsland rates around 6.5 out of 10, with the best improvement expected later today. The tidal patterns. The tidal patterns differ significantly across Victoria this afternoon. The surf coast and the ocean side of Mornington are close to high tide around lunchtime and will begin falling shortly. Western Port continues rising towards its strong afternoon high. Lake's entrance is moving in the opposite direction and falling toward low tide before 3 o'clock. On the surf coast, the falling tide should improve reef definition, but gradually expose more rock around the entries. Across Mornington, the drop in water may reveal better shaped banks while also increasing rip flow through the gutters. Around Phillip Island, the substantial high tide will strengthen currents through Western Port's entrances and channels. At Lake's entrance, the nearby beach conditions should always be considered separately from the ocean bar. Moderate beach surf does not automatically mean safe conditions through the entrance. The main statewide hazard this afternoon are changing tidal currents, cold water fatigue, residual sweep, and occasional waves arriving above the average set size. Spend time watching the water before paddling out, particularly at unfamiliar reefs, open beaches and ocean entrances. Now for the week ahead. Saturday is shaping as an excellent all-round winter surf day. Winds turn northerly at around 10 knots before increasing slightly during the middle of the day. Seas remain below 1 metre, while the southwest swell holds between 1.5 and 2.5 metres. That northerly airflow should favour the open beaches of Mornington and Phillip Island while keeping the surf coast reefs clean. The most exposed beaches will carry the greatest size, while the protected Torquay reefs may be smaller but well organised. Saturday currently looks like the best broadly surfable day of the weekend. Sunday should remain clean but become windier. Northerly winds strengthen through the day, with southwest swell holding around 1.5 to 2 metres and more size continuing through the far west. Mornington and Phillip Island should remain offshore, although stronger winds may make smaller waves harder to paddle into. The surf coast should stay clean, but become increasingly dependent on the more exposed reefs for consistency. Monday is the next likely change day. A cold front approaches Bass Strait with north to northwesterly winds expected before a westerly change and increasing showers. The cleanest opportunity should arrive early before the front reaches the central coastline. Longer range model guidance suggests a larger southwest swell may build around Monday evening and into Tuesday. However, confidence in its precise arrival time and peak size is still moderate rather than high. From Tuesday onwards, forecast confidence becomes lower. The likely pattern is fresh westerly wind behind the front, rising southwest swell, and protected surf coast reefs returning as the most dependable quality option. The exact timing of the swell peak and any cleaner recovery period would need to be reassessed closer to the event. So the final call for this afternoon is this. The surf coast is the safest option for overall quality, with clean, manageable reef surf and no major wind deterioration expected. Bells and Winky Pop should carry 2 to 3 foot waves, while the exposed reefs west of Torquay retain a little more size. The Mornington Peninsula and Phillip Island have the better open beach size, generally around 3 to 4 feet, with occasional larger sets. Both regions have some surface texture, but conditions should remain workable through the afternoon. Phillip Island has the slightly stronger lunchtime window, while Mornington will depend heavily on finding a functioning sandbank. East Gippsland should continue improving later today as the wind and sea state ease, with the greatest size toward Cape Conran, Marlow and the Far East. Looking toward the weekend, Saturday currently offers the best combination of light offshore wind, useful swell and surfable conditions across multiple regions. So that's your Victorian surf report for Friday, the 31st of July. Thanks for watching Hey Hey at Surfing. Enjoy the afternoon. Choose a break that suits your ability, and we'll see you again around the Victorian coast.